In the previous lesson, we saw how to manage pagination. In this lesson, let's take a look at filtering. So we're going to manage the filtering of our records. It could be by names, by IDs, like we saw in the Antelope criteria transfer, and we're going to manage the filtering by using the Antelope's condition transfer. In the same way that we created the method apply pagination, let's create a method to apply the filtering. We're going to add it before adding the pagination. So let's call this method apply, and we're going to pass the Antelope entities and the Antelope criteria transfer. We don't have this method yet, so let's just click on add method, and you can see that we have it now here. And let's render also this method private because we don't need that method outside the repository. And let's apply now our logic here. Let's add void as a return type, as we're not going to be returning anything. And then we can apply our logic here. First of all, let's get the condition out of the Antelope criteria transfer. So we're going to call it Antelope, and we call Antelope criteria transfer get Antelope conditions. Now that we have the Antelope conditions, we can verify. If not Antelope conditions, we just return. And now we can verify different values here. Let's first verify the name if we have the name in the condition. So we can verify if name, and we define this variable name equals Antelope condition get name. Then what we're gonna do is to apply the filter to the Antelope's entity. So Antelope's entity, and then we can use different method. We can use OR to concatenate different statements, or we can use, for example, the operator AND if we want that all of the conditions are met altogether. In this case, we're gonna opt in for OR, and then we can call filter by name like, and we pass the string like. So let's first create a variable for the like, and let's call it like pattern, and then we can filter by name like, and we pass like pattern. After that, we're going to do the same thing for ID Antelope with the same logic, but we could verify the ID Antelope first because this condition would have a higher priority than the name. It means that if we pass the ID, it means that we're going to get one record and we're going to just filter by ID and have the result. Then we can do the same thing as we saw for the name, and then we have the possibilities to receive a list of IDs and filter antelopes by that list of IDs. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to create an if, and let's call the variable antelope IDs. Then we're going to call Antelope entities or filter by ID Antelope in, and then we pass the Antelope ID. Then we could do the same thing for location ID and for type. Okay, the logic is the same. We get the ID location, and then we filter by location ID, and we do the same thing for ID type. And here it would be get location ID, and here get type ID. All right, now we have all of the apply search method implemented. You may wonder, where do we populate these Antelope conditions? Because we create the Antelope condition transfer, but the data that comes from the API call is located inside the glue request transfer. So you can see here that in get Antelope location, we receive the Antelope criteria transfer, and inside the Antelope criteria transfer we have the get Antelope conditions, and the Antelope conditions is of type Antelope condition transfer. And if you remember, we defined these properties: Antelope IDs, ID Antelope, name, color, type ID, location ID. Okay, so we have to get the data from the glue request transfer and populate this Antelope condition transfer in the glue API module. So how can we do it? Let's get back to the Antelope's backend API. So we're here in the controller. We called get Antelope location from the reader. And if you remember, here we have the Antelope criteria transfer. We already set the pagination because we get the pagination from the request. We also set the sort collection, and we set the antelope conditions here as an empty antelope condition transfer. So we have this inline variable here. So we already set the paginations, sort location, and we have the condition transfer empty here. So what we can do is take the filtering from the glue request transfer and populate this antelope condition transfer. In order to do that, we can use what we call expander in Spryker. So we can create a folder here under processor, and we can call that folder expander, and we create a file and we call it Antelope Expander. Let's add the namespace and let's create a class Antelope Expander, and let's begin by creating a method, and we can call this method expand with filters. And here we're going to receive an antelope condition transfer, antelope's condition transfer, and we're going to also receive the glue request transfer, and we're going to return an antelope condition transfer. So we can have more than one condition inside the glue request transfer, so we can get the filters from there. We can iterate the filters, so we can make a for each glue request transfer, and then we read the filters, get filters as filter, and then we begin interacting with these filters. Now, inside the for each, we can verify if the resource that was passed is related to antelopes, okay? Because people could pass another resource to the call. We have to verify if get resource different than antelopes, and that's the name of our resource, or we can even use the antelopes config, backend API config, resource antelopes, okay? We can use that constant. If we're not getting data for that resource, we just return antelope condition transfer. So we just short circuit the condition here. Let's just return the condition transfer so that we don't forget it here. Let me just show you the way we can make that call. So we can add here the filter. So we have the same call, but we're going to add filter because we're going to filter the data. Then name of the resource dot the field that we're going to use to filter on. In this case, name, for example, brown. We can add another condition, for example, ID antelope, and then here we can add, for example, 1. So the resource would be antelopes, and then the field would be ID antelope, and the value would be 1. So that's what we're doing here. Now that we know that we're sure that we're talking about antelopes here, we're gonna get out of the filter field. Let's call filter field, and we call the get field. That get field would get ID antelope or name. And then we can get the filter value with filter get value. Now, according to the field, we're gonna apply a certain condition on the antelope condition transfer. So we could create a switch statement, and then we can verify if we're talking about the field name. So we can make case antelope condition transfer, and we can use the constants from the antelope condition transfer to verify. So if we're talking about name or ID antelope, for example, what are we gonna do? We call antelope conditions transfer set ID antelope, and then we just break. Then we do the same for name, for example. So let's add name here. We call set name. We do the same thing for the other filters that we have in the antelope's condition transfer. You can see here. So we have antelope IDs, ID antelope name, color, type ID, location ID. So this is your challenge. Try to finish this piece of code by managing the rest of the fields and give it a try.